frigid weather, which to some of our friends in other states, not really that cold, at least not for you, but it is for us. So we're trying to stay as warm as we possibly can. My co-host Tommy is already in his blankets, and that's pretty much it. That's all he's gonna do. He's just gonna chill there. But he's a great co-host because he doesn't talk a lot of shit, unlike other people that I know. But we get by and we still keep on training no matter how cold it is. Because sometimes it's not even the physical stuff that we do, it's the mental exercises that we partake in that really solidify everything else that we are capable of doing. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, there's a lot of things that we have to consider, and in many martial arts, there are a lot of mental exercises, from even being able to calm down, being able to keep your mind focused on what you're doing despite the chaotic situation. You're tested, you're pressure tested, where you're exhausted, and can you follow through with all the physical stuff that you're supposed to remember, even though you're dead tired. Again, all these different ways to really test the mind to stay focused on the task at hand, which is very important in a high stress situation, to be able to think rationally and make better choices in those moments, which are all well and good. But what about the actual physical stuff? We learn a bunch of techniques, we learn a bunch of different moves, one technique after another, and the question is, why do we learn so many techniques? The simple answer is that that person may not throw that particular strike, that particular punch, so you need to know a bunch of other responses to different punches, different strikes, or a kick, or a knee, or whatever the case may be in that particular situation, and that's what techniques are. They're specific responses to a specific attack. Oftentimes off a right punch, because 90% of the world is right-handed and will probably throw that as their first strike. But that doesn't mean that it's going to happen all the time, and that doesn't mean that they're going to be compliant. And I think that's the first mental exercise to go through if we're really going to break away from something structured into something unstructured and chaotic, like a real fight. Is the person going to stand there and let me do XYZ as they throw their punch? Well, first of all, they might not even be throwing that punch. So all of a sudden, it eliminates a majority of the things that you learn, because, well, they're not going to throw a straight punch, and that's what you learn how to defend against, a straight right punch. Well, what if it's not that? Okay, that's another thing to consider. What if that punch, and would that fall under the guise of not being compliant? I mean, I think it should, right? Like, that should be the first idea of, okay, what if they don't punch the way that I'm used to people punching at me? Which always is a factor in why we do seminars, why we go and cross-train, is because we get a different feel, a different understanding of the way people move. Or just training with different partners alone, that gives you a different viewpoint of how to respond. Because some techniques aren't going to work on somebody who's taller or shorter or simply bigger. So again, pressure testing, getting out of the element of what you understand in your classroom is a great way to see these things. And again, one of the major perceptions is, what if this person isn't compliant? There's the mental exercise to start off with. What if I'm doing this technique and that person doesn't stand there long enough for me to do it? So what comes next? What is after that? Do you simply just stop? Deer in the headlights, I don't know what to do? Or do you move on to another technique? Which then begs the question, how do you then teach your mind to move on to another technique when your first one doesn't work? Well, then that's another exercise that we would have to then explore on the mentality behind what you're doing. Is the mentality to complete a technique, or is the mentality to hurt the person in front of you or defend yourself, depending on what side of the legal issues you're on? But if that is not something that was practiced and becomes a natural thought process, will you actually do it? You can say that you're going to do it, you can practice doing it, But is your mentality really there to say, I'm going to keep going? If XYZ didn't work, I'm going to try CBD or any of the other alphabets that you have out there, and you're just going to keep trying until something works. We can argue that sparring does that very well, where you get hit and you keep going, but sparring, it still lacks the element of danger, which I think is very important for this particular concept, where you're just going to go until the job is done, until you can safely get home or find a better camera crew. You never know. But because mine sucks. But I get what I pay for, and I don't pay him shit, so that's what I get. But again, it's one of those things that you really have to consider in order to take it outside of the element. Again, first of all, is the person being compliant? Second of all, do I have the mentality to keep going and keep trying different things to be able to win or survive this brutal attack in a self-defense situation? And then beyond that is, okay, do I even have the timing, the self-control to understand what it is that I have in front of me? And I think that just really goes in general to, do I understand how a human body is going to respond or react to the things that I do? Hopefully by this point you've trained enough on the physical that you're confident in being able to do the physical things. But again, the mental exercise of, how does this affect the person in front of me? When I do this, what do they respond with? If you jab somebody in the throat with your thumb, what are they most likely to do? Doesn't mean you're going to 100% get it every single time, but the added element of creating a distraction, creating enough pain for that person so they just pause just enough for you to move on to the moves that you do understand or the technique that you've practiced. So, do we know that? Have we explored that? Have we been hit enough to know, okay, that would have made me do this. That would have made me do that. Oh, my first reaction to that would be to do this. And then, are we cognizant enough to capitalize on those moments that we cause? Or do we just wait and see, like, oh, that was cool, but we missed the opportunity? Because that time and that window goes by very, very quickly. For those of you who have done anything physical in real time, it really doesn't last very long. People always say, oh, it's a matter of inches. It's a matter of milliseconds in my mind, because time and space, same thing. We're not going to get into the metaphysics of it and all that. But to me it is. Anyways, the point is, taking that time or giving yourself that time then becomes crucial. And what are the other ways that we can give ourselves time? Distractions, feints, hurting the person, stomping on their foot, knocking them a little bit, stepping in deeper than they expected, and you all of a sudden you check them or you cause them to just fall a little bit off balance. If you can keep somebody's mind constantly stumbling, trying to catch up to whatever it is you're doing, well, I would say that is, in essence, stealing their time and giving yourself all the time you need to accomplish the techniques that you're trying to do. Because what I'm really asking is, if you have a non-compliant individual, could you still pull off the techniques that you're fond of, the techniques that you spent years developing or getting good at or just learning because your system has that many techniques? Would you be able to pull one of those off with somebody that isn't going to stand there and isn't willing to let you do that? For me, the answer is you should be. Now, will it look exactly the same way that you learned it? No, it can't. It can't possibly look the same way, but the elements within them should all be there. I'm pretty sure in many of the techniques, regardless of the system, there's distractions. Even if what you're learning is after the first one or two moves, you strike the opponent, that strike may not be the end of it. It may not be something enough to knock the person out or keep them from coming back at you, but it may distract them long enough to do the following movements. Have we taken the time to really explore what the individual pieces actually mean, and how does that translate to how the person's going to react? All the elements have been there and are constantly there in, I believe, any martial arts, but have we explored them as such, or do we just take it for granted and we just do the technique and we believe it's going to work and we don't question it? Personally, I feel we have to question it. We have to start somewhere, and I believe the very first question we should ask is, would this actually work with a non-compliant individual? And if it doesn't, how can I make it work? Because ultimately, you're going to be the one in the fight, not your system, not your instructor, you. Which means it has to make sense to you, and I feel like you owe it to you and your training to just ask these questions and figure out what are the things that we need. Because ultimately, we want to get to a point where we can create our own things on the fly. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, that means being completely fluid with everything that you do, with a non-compliant individual, with somebody who's faster, somebody that's maybe stronger than you, bigger than you. And all of a sudden, you can still make things work. You can still effectively protect yourself or harm this individual because that's where your mindset is. But it takes time and it takes focus. There are some individuals that can come up with these ideas and techniques on the fly in their head without really having many holes in the process. Why? Because they understand these elements. They understand the reaction of a person. They understand what they're giving, what that person is giving to them. They have other ideas and concepts to steal time, to give themselves space. They move in such a way where they deliberately avoid 60% of the other possibilities and make up the other 40% with skill. And if that particular movement doesn't work, well, their mindset is already set on letting that go and going on to the next thing and on to the next thing and on to the next thing until something works. And ultimately, that's where I want to be. I want to be able to come up with this stuff on my own, but I haven't explored these elements thoroughly enough. And I feel like it's important that I share these with you, because what are the other elements that we should consider in a real fight? And I'm not talking about technique, I'm not talking about lineage, I'm talking about pure human interaction. What is that person showing you? What is that person doing? And how does that knowledge help us in our fight and help us develop our own way of fighting? Because regardless of what system you do, your individual thoughts will always affect the way that you go about doing things. Your mindset, your ideals, they will all have something to do with how you respond and how you react. And if we're not aware of it, well, we can fall short, or we can get our asses kicked so bad that we quit that martial art the next day, because what was the point of all those years of training? But that's just, again, a hypothetical thought. And that's all this really is how do we take the hypothetical, think of it logically, and then bring it into our art and make it that much better. Actually, that now that I say it out loud, that sounds like a lot. But I think it's doable. I've seen it done, and I believe we can make this happen. So share anything, any ideas that you guys have. I would love to hear from you, because they're always very fun, and I do take them to heart and do my best to understand them and incorporate them into what I do. So thank you very much for watching. Hope to see you on the next one. Till then, 3, 2, 1, cut! Tommy, say bye to the camera. There you go. That's all you got, folks. That's the most you'll ever get. Have a good one till the next time.